She wasn't poor. She had electricity. But every night, she chose candlelight. Not because she had to, but because of a number in a black notebook. A rule so strict she wouldn't even tell her husband. 1961. A small town. A first-grade teacher. And what she was secretly building, no one saw coming.
Vivian Cross had wanted to open a small lending library since she was 19. Not a real library. The county already had one of those, with its tall stone steps and its serious hours and its particular smell of old binding glue. She wanted something smaller, warmer, a room, maybe two, where children from the poorer end of town could come after school and borrow books without a card, without a fine system, without anyone looking at their shoes. She'd told her mother about it once, at the kitchen table. Her mother had listened carefully, then said, "Vivian, you'll have a family to think about soon." She'd told her college roommate. Her roommate had laughed, not unkindly, and said, "On a teacher's salary?" She'd told her new husband, James, on their third date, before she knew she loved him. She wanted to see his face when she said it. He'd tilted his head and said, "Tell me more." She married him 4 months later. But even James, sweet and practical James, who fixed things around the apartment on weekends and never complained about anything, even he had started to speak about the library the way people speak about nice weather they don't expect. Maybe someday. We'll see how things go. Vivian had stopped mentioning it, but she had not stopped planning. The Black Notebook appeared in October of 1961. 2 weeks after school started and 3 days after she sat down and did math that made her breath catch. Not in despair, but in a cold, clear realization. If I track everything, if I make different choices, if nobody spends what I save before I save it, it could actually happen. How did she even begin? 2026. Lesson. The most powerful financial plans are built around a specific dream, not a vague goal. Research shows people save 42% more consistently when savings are tied to a named personal purpose rather than a general emergency fund. The first page of the notebook had one column. She labeled it the library fund. Below it, she wrote the number that was already there, $0.00. She stared at that for a full minute. Then she turned to the next page and wrote something harder, something that took more courage than the dream itself. What am I spending that I haven't been watching? A teacher's salary in 1961 in rural Tennessee was $187 a month. James worked at the county assessor's office, $210 a month. Together, $397. Enough to live modestly, not enough to save casually. But Vivian had a quiet, stubborn theory she hadn't shared with anyone. She believed that money leaked before you noticed it, not in floods, in drops, small ones, separate ones, each one reasonable on its own. The 10 cents for a soda at the break room machine, the magazine she bought at the pharmacy while waiting, the extra yard of fabric she picked up because it was pretty and she'd figure out a use for it later. Each one fine. Together, a slow drain on everything she was trying to build. She spent the first 2 weeks of October not changing anything, just watching, writing down every cent that left her hands, without judgment, without shame, just data. At the end of week 2, she sat at the table after supper and added it up. $31.40, gone in 14 days on things she could not clearly account for. She didn't feel guilty. She felt awake. James came in from the other room and found her staring at the notebook with an expression he couldn't read. "Everything all right?" he asked. "I'm just seeing something clearly for the first time," she said. He sat down across from her. She turned the notebook toward him. He read it slowly. Then he looked up. "What are we doing about it?" he said. We. She loved him for that. But the school building itself would soon create a different kind of pressure. 2026 lesson. The first step in any financial reset isn't cutting, it's witnessing. 2 weeks of honest tracking without changing behavior reveals patterns no budgeting app alert can match because you felt every transaction yourself.
On Mondays, Vivian taught reading to 22 first graders. She knew which ones came from homes where books lived on shelves, and which ones had never held a hardcover that belonged to them personally. She knew because of the way they held the classroom copies. The ones who'd grown up with books handled them casually, and the ones who hadn't held them with a particular careful reverence, like something borrowed from a world they weren't sure they belonged to. That was the whole reason for the dream. Every Monday reminded her. But Monday also brought something else in October of 1961. The Teacher's Lounge. The other women, 4 of them, all older, all kind in their way, had a habit of pooling lunch orders from the diner 2 blocks over. A hot plate, something sweet, a shared newspaper. It was social. It was warm. It cost Vivian $1.20 every Monday she participated. She'd never thought about it before. It was just what you did. The first Monday after she started the notebook, she sat with her brought-from-home lunch and politely declined the pooled order. Betty, who'd taught 4th grade for 11 years and had opinions about everything, looked at her over her reading glasses. "Watching the pennies?" she asked, not unkindly, but knowingly. Vivian smiled. "Saving for something." "What?" She almost said it. Almost. "I'll tell you when it's real," she said instead. Betty shrugged and went back to her sandwich. But something had shifted in Vivian. The act of declining, of choosing the notebook over the diner, had made the dream more real, not less. Every small choice she made for it was a vote she cast in its direction. By the end of October, the Monday lunch decision alone had saved her $4.80. She wrote it in the library fund column. The number was still small, but it had a heartbeat now. But the school building itself would soon create a different kind of pressure. 2026 lesson. Social spending, the casual, communal expenses of workplace culture, is one of the most invisible budget leaks in modern life. Subscriptions split with friends, round-robin lunches, group buys, each feels negligible. Tracked together, they can consume $200 to $400 a month. November brought report cards, parent evenings, and the kind of cold that crept under the apartment door, no matter how many towels you pressed against the gap. It also brought Vivian's mother-in-law for a week. Margaret Cross was not a difficult woman. She was simply a woman of strong opinions about what a home ought to look like and what a young wife ought to be doing with her time and money. She arrived with a covered dish, a warm coat for James, and within 48 hours had noticed that the apartment was, in her words, a little sparse. The living room had only one small bookshelf, a second-hand sofa, and the table where Vivian graded papers and kept her notebooks. "You should get some curtains," Margaret said on the second evening. "Something with color. I saw lovely ones at Belmont's, on sale, too." Vivian smiled. "We're happy with what we have." Happy is one thing, a proper home is another. James looked at Vivian across the supper table, a look she had learned to read. You don't have to explain yourself to her. But the pressure sat on her like a damp coat. Because Margaret wasn't wrong that the apartment was sparse. She was just wrong about why.
every dollar not spent on curtains was a dollar in the notebook. Every evening not at Belmont's was an evening at the table with the grade book and the black ledger side by side, one full of her students' progress, one full of her own. She did not buy the curtains. She bought a single potted plant from the Five and Dime for 35 cents and put it in the window instead. It was green. It was alive. It cost almost nothing. Margaret said nothing about it, but looked at it for a long time. The real test came mid-month. 2026 lesson, social pressure to spend, from family, neighbors, or social media, is the single most underestimated budget threat. In 2026, lifestyle inflation driven by comparison accounts for an estimated $6,000 in unnecessary annual spending per household. The plant in the window was Vivian's answer to all of it.
The furnace in the school building stopped working on a Wednesday. Not broke down gradually, just stopped. One morning the rooms were warm, and by afternoon every classroom had a chill that the children felt immediately, pulling their coats back on over their sweaters and breathing little visible clouds while Vivian kept reading aloud to keep them engaged, keep them still, keep the lesson moving. The principal, Mr. Hartley, sent a note home with every child. School will be closed Thursday and Friday while repairs are completed. We apologize for the disruption. 2 days without school meant two things. One, the children would fall behind and Vivian would need to restructure her entire November lesson plan, done at home, on her own time, with her own paper and her own ink. 2, and this one hit differently. There was a small stipend the county provided for classroom supplies. With the school closed, Vivian realized she'd need to replace 3 broken readers from her own pocket before December, because Mr. Hartley had made it quietly clear that the repair bill would eat the supply budget for the term. She sat with the notebook. The library fund now held $23.40. It had taken 6 weeks of careful, deliberate choices. The readers would cost approximately $4.50 total if she found them secondhand, $7 if she bought them new. She looked at the $23.40 for a long time. This was the moment she had known would come, the moment the dream and the immediate reality stood face to face. She closed the notebook. She made one bold move. 2026 lesson. Every saving journey has a moment when the emergency and the dream compete for the same money. Having a separate named fund protects it because it has an identity, not just a balance. Vivian's library fund column was untouchable because it had a name. She went to the public library, not for the books, though she found 2 of the readers she needed in their discard sale bin for 15 cents each, which solved the problem at a cost of 30 cents instead of $4. She went because the librarian, a tall, quiet woman named Mrs. Adler, had a reputation among the county teachers for knowing things. Vivian sat across from her at the reference desk and, with careful vagueness, described what she was trying to build. Not the full dream, just the shape of it. A small reading room, donated books, flexible hours, no fines. Mrs. Adler listened without the polite smile. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a county notice about an annual small community grant available to private citizens for educational purposes. Applications due in February. Award up to $200. $200. Vivian felt something rearrange itself behind her sternum. Most people don't apply, Mrs. Adler said, sliding the paper across. They think it's too complicated. Is it? No, it's just paperwork and a clear plan. Vivian walked home with the notice folded in her coat pocket, the 30-cent readers under her arm, and something new in her chest. Not just hope, but architecture, a structure she could build toward. That evening, she opened the notebook to a new page. She wrote, grant application, February deadline, need, proof of purpose, estimated costs, community impact statement. She began planning, not spending, planning. But pride nearly ruined everything. 2026 lesson: the most valuable financial resource is often information, not money. In 2026, billions of dollars in community grants, employer matches, and assistance programs go unclaimed every year because people assume they won't qualify. Asking costs nothing.
She told James on a Sunday evening, not just the notebook, not just the library fund column, not just the dream, all of it, the full shape of the plan, the grant application, the second-hand readers, the Monday lunches she'd been skipping, the plant instead of the curtains, Mrs. Adler and the folded notice. She laid it on the table between them like something fragile. James was quiet for a long time. Vivian watched his face carefully, looking for the polite smile, braced for maybe someday. He reached across the table and picked up the notebook. He read slowly, turned pages, ran his thumb down her careful columns, the way you read something you want to understand properly. Then he set it down.
"Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he said. The question surprised her. She'd expected doubt. She'd prepared for doubt. "I didn't want," she started. "I thought if I said it before it was real, it would stay not real." He nodded slowly. He understood that. He was a man who'd grown up in a family where wanting things too loudly brought disappointment too quickly. "I have $14 in my work savings account," he said quietly, "the one I was going to use for a new radio." He pushed the notebook back toward her. "Add it to the library fund." She stared at him. "Write it down," he said, and almost smiled. "You write everything else down." She wrote it down. $23.40 plus $14, $37.40. And for the first time in 6 weeks of careful, solitary work, she didn't feel alone inside the plan. Now only 7 days remained until the end of the month. 2026 lesson: financial transparency between partners remains one of the most avoided conversations in modern relationships. Yet couples who align on a shared financial goal save faster and argue less about money. Vulnerability, in this case, is a strategy. December was 6 days away. Vivian had $37.40 in the library fund and $11 left in the general household account until payday. She mapped the final week in the notebook with the precision she used for lesson plans. Tuesday, parent conference evening. Bring lunch from home. Do not stop at the pharmacy counter after. Wednesday, James's work dinner. He would attend, she would not. Social cost, 0. Actual cost, 0. Thursday, winter supply list for classroom. Request from school budget, not personal funds. Write the request formally to Mr. Hartley. Friday, end of month notebook review. Total the library fund. Write February grant deadline in red. She moved through the week like someone reading a map they'd drawn themselves. Steady, deliberate, no detours. The pharmacy was the hardest. She stopped there on Thursday. She needed a prescription refilled, nothing more, and stood for exactly 40 seconds in front of the display of small gifts near the register. Pretty things, reasonable prices, the kind of table designed to catch people in transition between needing something and leaving. She walked past it. She paid for the prescription. She walked out. On the pavement, she stood for a moment in the cold air and felt something she hadn't expected. Not deprivation, not virtue, something quieter. Authorship. The feeling of writing your own story instead of being written by circumstances. She went home and wrote in the notebook. Thursday, pharmacy, did not spend extra, chose the fund. 3 words, chose the fund. That was all. Would it be enough? 2026 lesson: Writing down not just what you'll spend, but when and where you'll resist spending. Behavioral economists call this implementation intention. People who use this technique are 2 to 3 times more likely to follow through on savings goals than those relying on willpower alone. December's first payday arrived on a Friday. Vivian sat at the table early, before James was awake, before the street outside had any noise in it, and opened the notebook to the month-end page. She added the final numbers slowly. She did not rush this part. She had learned over 8 weeks that this was the moment the work became real, that the number wasn't just a number. It was a record of every decision, every deliberate pause, every small act of choosing the future over the present. The library fund, $41.15. She set the pen down. $41.15. Built from a teacher's lunch decisions and an unspent radio budget and 30-cent second-hand readers and 1 plant instead of curtains and 40 seconds outside a pharmacy display case. It was not enough to open a library. It was not meant to be. Not yet. But it was enough to prove to herself, clearly, without doubt, that the dream was not a wish, it was a project. And projects had timelines, and timelines had steps. And the first step was always the same. Prove to yourself that you can. She had proved it. She wrote at the bottom of the month-end page, in letters slightly larger than her usual careful script, February, grant application. This is happening. Then she made coffee and waited for James to wake up, and when he came into the kitchen, she slid the notebook across the table without a word. He read the number. He looked up. She was already smiling. 2026 lesson. The most important financial milestone is not a large number. It is the first time you reach a self-set goal through deliberate behavior. That moment rewires your relationship with money more profoundly than any salary increase because it proves agency, not luck. Vivian Cross submitted the grant application in February of 1962. She was awarded $175, not the full $200, but close enough that she and James stayed up until midnight working out what it meant for the timeline. The Millbrook Reading Room opened in September of 1963, above the same hardware store where they lived, in a space the landlord, moved by the application she showed him, offered at half rent for the first year. It had 47 books on opening day. By the end of 1964, it had over 300, all donated, all cataloged in, what else, a notebook. 60 years later, in 2026, we are drowning in financial tools. We have apps that round up our purchases and invest the change. We have AI that analyzes spending patterns and sends us weekly summaries. We have more visibility into our own financial behavior than any generation in history. And somehow, most people still feel like money controls them rather than the other way around. Because here is what Vivian understood that the apps don't teach you. The act of writing it yourself makes it yours. When you type a number into a screen, you're entering data. When you write it by hand, in your own ink, in a book that belongs to you, you're making a record of a choice. And that is completely different. Neurologically, emotionally, practically different. In 2026, the average person checks their banking app 11 times a week. They look at their balance the way you look at weather through a window, observing, not acting. Vivian didn't observe her money. She directed it. She gave every dollar an assignment before it could wander. She named her goal. She wrote it at the top of the page where she had to see it every time she opened the notebook. And she made the dream so visible, so present, that every small decision naturally bent toward it. You might not want a reading room, but you want something. Everyone wants something that the polite smile says is unlikely. Maybe it's a year without debt. Maybe it's a business that lives only in your head right now. Maybe it's something you haven't said out loud yet, because you're not sure it's real enough to survive being spoken. Vivian's answer to that uncertainty was simple.
Write it down. Give it a column. Feed it, even in small amounts, before you feed anything else. The dream doesn't wait for the right moment. The right moment is made the same way Vivian made it, one deliberate, documented, quietly stubborn choice at a time. If something in this story felt familiar, if you've ever had a dream that someone smiled at politely, leave it in the comments. Just the dream, nothing else. I want to know what you're building.